All right, folks. Well, welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. And today's edition, we are very excited to be doing a band that we talked about doing for the last 4 months, and finally we got to it. We are going to rank the top 10 Yes albums. And here is my co host on this episode, none other than Mr. Thom Jennings. Welcome.
Welcome, Mr. Joseph Suto. I always love it when when you interviewed Lawrence Gowan of Styx, and he says he said Joseph like 3,000 times during the interview with that fantastic Canadian accent as well. He's like, well, Joseph, yes, you know. So I'm not as certainly not as good looking or as talented as Lawrence Gowan. I'm always happy to be your co-host when we get the opportunity.
All right, so we're going to do something a little different here since Yes recently came out with a new album back in October. The latest album for them, The Quest. Why don't we're going to start off by giving us a quick review of that album, and then we're going to go into our top 10. So why don't you start off for us what your thoughts are on the latest Yes album, studio album?
Well, it's interesting. This is the 22nd Yes studio album, if I remember correctly. And I believe the second one with lead singer John Davison. So, yeah, this I kind of like to call this lineup Yes US. The primary drivers of it are Billy Sherwood, who is an American, as is lead singer John Davison. Jay Shellen I believe, is doing some of the drum work, maybe in place of Alan White. I don't know which tracks he's on or which he isn't. But ultimately, the current Yes lineup that's out there, its ties back to its heritage are Jeff Downes from the drama era, and of course Steve Howe, who joined the band on their third album. So this is maybe the first Yes record without any original members at all. Yeah, it is. Come to think of it, so I guess we kind of haven't discussed that, Joey, but that's an interesting fact. That this album would be the first one without Chris Squire, meaning it really would be the first Yes album that has zero members that appeared on the very first Yes album, which kind of talks about the evolutionary progress, so to speak, of both progressive rock and just classic rock in general. A lot of these artists are just kind of slowly being replaced, and you almost wonder, with a band like Yes, can they go on for another 30, 40 years with just interchanging members and have it all kind of relate back to the beginning. All that being said, taking The Quest as on its own merits, it's a good album. It definitely, I think sometimes, especially through Yes's history, they really tried to sort of tap into whatever the musical wave was at the time. You figure the first Yes albums came out in the late 60s, kind of reflected what was going on in the music scene back then. And again, the 70s, Yes, is very 70s-ish, very prog rock. And then in the 80s, Asia kind of ushers in that more, pop sound. And they have their last real commercial wave of success. And then since then, you've had these periods where they've gone back to more of their kind of 70s progressive rock era roots. And that's really where this album kind of lands. It has a little bit of a kind of drama era feel. The album that was the first without John Anderson, and
Mm-hmm.
Anderson returned later, but it certainly harkens back to the real height of the progressive rock era. Some of it reminds me more of like Emerson, Lake and Palmer than that does of Yes, because I think some of the keyboard work, especially that opening track, it almost reminds me of that that big one that ELP did that was like a remake of a Bach song, which I should remember. You know the one I'm talking about, Joey?
Yeah.
We're both like, what is the name of that song? And there's like people probably screaming at the screen going like, this is the name of it. And I think the other thing is with the post John Anderson, Yes, and you can't ignore the fact that John Anderson is not there. I love John Davidson's vocal work on here. It's excellent, but it's not John Anderson. I think John has some very unique characteristics. There's just like a teeny bit of gravel. I would almost call it pebbles that John has in his voice. John Anderson has that John Davison doesn't. Davison is voice is very smooth, very silky. Um, at times you forget he's not the original lead singer because his voice is pretty darn close. I mean, I would say it's comparable to Arnel Pineda doing Steve Perry material, or Kelly Hansen doing Foreigner stuff. But I think if you're a Yes fan and you're not like one of those people that go, oh, if it's not such and such a member, it's not really Yes. Then you'll definitely enjoy it. It's a great prog rock album. I think that it's a little bit too long. There's some great moments on here, but there's also kind of moments where it just sort of drags because they put out so much material on this particular record. But my overall assessment is, hey, any band that's been around as long as Yes that's still putting out new music, I certainly wouldn't want to discourage them, and I'm happy to support them doing that because I think that that's an important part of the creative process. It's an important way of introducing the band to new fans, and I wish them all the best.
Yeah, I tend to agree pretty much right on spot with all that you said there. I think the album is a little too long, but they had to put it on 2 discs. It's that long.
Yeah.
So, and most of the songs are clocking in on the average of about 6 minutes or longer. The first track, the Ice Bridge, that's the one that they first released, and that seems to be the one that the fans really like the most on it from all the gathering that I've seen any mention about it. Dare to Know, another good song. Mystery Tour is a unique song because it talks a lot about the Beatles and stuff, and throughout there, the way that song is written. Interesting, shorter song, clocking in at 3.5 minutes. But that's like the shortest song on the album. Everything else is pretty lengthy. I think Downs is very dominant on it, a lot of keyboards. And then Steve Howe doing a lot of background vocals. Did you catch that?
Yeah. And I think Howe's guitar work is really good on here. And that little Beatles track too. It's funny because it's kind of timely with the whole Get Back documentary coming out. It's almost like you could have a little parlor game where you pick how many songs and whatnot are mentioned in it. And it's kind of an interesting nod because Alan White was part of John Lennon's band, the Plastic Ono band. So there's definitely that Beatles connection back there. But I mean that particular song, I kind of like it, but it still seems to me more like a novelty song than a Yes song.
So yeah, so overall, I give it about 2.5 stars out of 5. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
Not the worst Yes album, and definitely not in my top 10, as we will find out, because that's where we're heading next.
Yep.
So,
It's definitely in my top 22.
all right, that's good.
Yeah,
At least it made the list.
it made the list. Yeah, we won't tell you where because it didn't make the top 10 for me, and I don't think it did for you either.
No. All right, let's find out what your number 10 is. It'd be interesting to see these choices here. What do you got for your number 10?
So we were talking off air. You're like, "Hey, did you go back and listen to any of this stuff before we did this? We're doing this recording." And actually, I did. I had a chance to listen to a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
And an album that I rediscovered was Magnification. It's the last record with John Anderson as lead vocalist. And while there's a couple of tracks that kind of, aren't the greatest, overall, I just love this record. It has very unique production qualities to it, has a really big sound. I don't know if you know the history behind this one, but I believe, and I never pronounce the guy's name right, and I can usually fire off the names of every Yes player ever. It's Igor Kryashev or whatever who was
Hmm.
there, and he had been kicked out of the band because he was involved in some altercation with a female, which is a good reason to get kicked out of a band and never be able to play with them again. And so they did this record without a keyboard player, and instead they had a full symphony orchestra backing them on it. And man, there are just some moments on here that are just so big and so powerful. And I like it because I think it is one of the few times that they've been able to kind of reconcile the 1980s Yes lineup, the Trevor Rabin era stuff, and the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, Squire lineup that was super proggy. So
Hmm.
if you haven't listened to this one in a while, I would definitely say go back and listen to it. Turn the volume up to 11. It's just a fun ride. So it's and what a great exit for John Anderson as far as their recording career. I know he probably didn't realize that at the time, but it's kind of a nice exclamation point to his time in Yes.
Okay, I'll definitely have to give that one a listen because unfortunately that one didn't make my top 10. But that's only because there's 10 better ones. That's all. And we're going to start off by giving you my number 10, which is Relayer. Album went gold, goes back to 1974. Came out in November of 74. Um, yeah, definitely one of these albums that I think kind of gets overlooked. Little unique in that it only has 3 tracks on the whole album, including the 21 minute and 46 seconds Gates of Delirium. And then the other songs are clocking in over 9 minutes. So I mean that takes up all their time. But to come up with a 3 track album, it's pretty solid. It's some good stuff on here. Obviously the radio never touched it, but definitely a good listen. This one features Patrick Moraz on keyboards and basically the rest of the regular band: White, Squire, Howe, and of course John Anderson.
Yeah.
And this was came out just right in the middle. Obviously they released. This was the follow up to the Tales from Topographic Oceans, and then after this album, they kind of took like a hiatus for 3 years. So yeah, I definitely give this as my number 10.
That
Any,
one made my list, but it's a little bit higher, so
oh,
I'll wait to mention that. So we
okay.
already have a deviation.
Yes.
All right, number 9. I can give you a hint. Finish this sentence. Bacon, lettuce, and
Tormato.
yes, one of the most reviled albums in Yes fandom. So interestingly enough, you talk about going back and listening to the catalog. A friend of mine who won't be listening to this particular episode, but if he is, his name is Matthew Backless, or as I like to call him, Matt. So Matt, we were doing a vinyl night at a place that we were doing vinyl night in Medina. And Matt and I got to talking about this particular record, and he says, do you have a copy of it on vinyl? I said, no, I really don't. It's one of those ones you find in the bargain bins all the time, so you just kind of wait to pick it up. He's like, well, I got a copy. I'd be more than happy to give it to you because I hate this record. I'm like, oh, wow. I'm like, I don't really remember it being that bad. So sure enough, man, I brought it home. I popped it on the turntable, and I listened to it, and I go, why does everybody hate this record so bad? Like, it's not, I mean, there's no clear singles on it or anything like that, but I don't get it. It's, it's the main Yes players. It's really kind of the classic rock Yes guys. I mean, it's certainly not it's certainly not drama, but it's definitely not, some of the other kind of clunkers that they did in their career. But, so anyhow, I figured I would give Tormato some recognition for the album that it is, because I can't be the only one in the universe that thinks that this album is actually pretty good.
Well, it went platinum, so you can't. There's about 1 million other people out there who must like it. Hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think Tormato suffers from the comparison to other records, and if I'm correct, I mean, this was really the last album of the kind of original run for Yes, and they broke up after this one. Because this is the one. Is this the one right before Drama, or was
Yeah,
that
this was
going for the one?
yeah, this was the last one with Anderson before he came back and with the explosive 90125. Yeah.
Boom, explosive. So that's my take on Tormato. I was almost going to put it at number 1 just so that we could get more views, because people would be like, what is this idiot thinking? Tormato, the number 1 Yes album? I mean, I'll probably get enough grief from the Yes fan community. They're going to be going, Tormato number 9. Does this guy have a needle on his turntable? So,
Well, I don't know. I never heard anything that drastic about it, but we'll see. All right, let me give you my number 9 here. I'm going with Drama. Definitely a different album. Anderson was gone by then, and we get Trevor Horn from the Buggles and Jeff Downes both coming in here, and that was Horn's only album that he played on, although he produced a couple of the albums. He it's actually not a bad album. I mean, I think you were mentioning that somebody didn't like this album. Fans don't like
Drama?
this. Yeah.
No, I don't think Drama really gets any. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have it on my list coming up, so we could discuss it more then. But I'll tell you my own personal feelings about my conflicted emotions in regard to Drama when we get to it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they played this one in concert in our park, and that was back a couple 2016 maybe,
Yeah.
somewhere around there. They played it that album and Tales. And those were two albums you never would have expected they would donate a whole concert to. Yet they did, and I thought it went over quite well actually.
Yeah.
You know, great to see Davidson play sing on this album. So you only got to see on the album itself. It's only Trevor Horn. So uh, I think there's a lot of good songs on here that this album never got a lot of airplay. And then for whatever reason, it was kind of, at the turn of the 1980s, where everything was starting to change. Punk was big, disco was dying, and everything was just all. But yes, kind of kept kept their same type of music going in the progressive style. And obviously Anderson left, Wakeman left, so they brought in Horn and Downs, and that's where shortly after that, the Buggles hit hit big and were the first video ever played on MTV, and that was Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes. So
Yep. And they wound up having to leave, yes, because they went to jail for killing the radio star with video, right? Is that what happened?
something like that.
I knew there was a joke there somewhere.
All right, well
Um,
let's see what your number 8 is.
my number 8 is a Big Generator, and this is the second one from the Rabin era, which Trevor Rabin. My youngest son, his name is Trevor Jennings, and he was named after Trevor Rabin. I was actually listening to Trevor's Rabin solo album, "Can't Look Away" at the time. Really fell in love with it, and that's around the time that Trevor was kind of getting ready to be born, and we were picking names. So that's how he wanted being named. So kind of the Trevor Rabin era has always been very sentimental to me. This record, I mean, anytime you got to follow up your biggest record, it's a challenge. You really have two choices. You can either regurgitate a lot of the same themes from the previous record, or you can go a 180. And there's risk and reward in going on both ends. I think Big Generator probably aired a little bit too much on the rehash of the 90125 and tried to make lightning strike twice. That being said, 90125 is an incredible album. So if you're going to try to mimic something, you might as well mimic an album like that. I mean, I think a suitable comparison might be, For Those About to Rock, as a follow-up to Back in Black. I mean, For Those About to Rock is like by AC/DC, in case people didn't know, is kind of a, Back in Black light. And I think Big Generator in some ways is 90125 light. That being said, Love Will Find a Way is absolutely one of my favorite Yes songs of all time. It's just such a super high energy track. I fell in love with it the first time I heard it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first times I ever listened to this record was with a guy named Larry Mullen Jr., who is, do you know who that is, Joey?
Mm-mm.
He's a drummer of U2. He was actually
wow.
at my apartment. We had a party post U2 concert. I have witnesses. I'm not just making this up. And he was there with a bunch of road crew, and they were drinking and hanging out at our place. And one of the road crew guys went through my record collection. He's like, you got the new Yes album? And so I put it on, and sure enough, Larry Mullen Jr. was there listening to it with me. And you know what he said to me about this particular record?
Hmm.
Nothing. He never even talked to me the whole time he was there, but he was still at my party, and that's
Sweet.
that is a great memory. I can always say, "Hey, man, Larry Mullen Jr. came to my party," and they're like, "Was he a cool dude?" I'm like, "I don't know. He wouldn't talk to me. Like, literally, wouldn't give me an autograph. He had like bodyguards around him. I mean, it
Oh,
was
wow.
an interesting experience." But we'll save that for our U2 rankings video, which we'll never do probably because I don't know that much U2.
Okay. All right. So we're at 8. Mine is actually Union, which is kind of like the reunion album where everybody got together and they came up with they brought that out for the Union tour. It was pretty much their last album to actually make any significant sales wise. It was the last one to hit gold or any status there. Came out in 91. It actually came out after I actually seen them on that tour, oddly enough. I saw them like 5 days before the album came out. Kind of odd. But it reached number 15. But it definitely is a totally different style than Big Generator, which it followed. It still featured, Union features pretty much, all the people who played in the actual tour for Union. So you had like double the amount of keyboard players, double the amount of drummers, because Bruford was there, White was there. You had Tony Kaye, you had Wakeman, and Trevor Rabin and Steve Howe. So yeah, it was definitely a great tour. Actually, one of the standouts of the Yes shows I've ever seen. It was uniquely presented. It was in the round. Did you
Yeah.
see that tour?
I did not. I've heard the live recordings. I've seen the videos, and the song "Lift Me Up" is just absolutely one of my favorite Yes songs of all time. I think that's a Trevor Rabin composition, but it's yeah, I mean that era stands as a very unique era for them because again, it's the true marriage of the two bands, Yes Coast, Yes West Coast, and Yes UK, I guess, is the way that they sort of build it at the time. But the record really was just two separate records. It was an Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe record, and a kind of Yes 90125 era record spliced together.
Right.
So I think that's why it could be a little inconsistent. And I listened to
Hmm.
this one recently, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was very close to hitting my top 10. And I think it's another one that gets a lot of undue harsh criticism. I mean, for what it is, it's a pretty cool record. You can't really, I mean, I can't imagine the logistics of trying to jam 8 or 9 players onto a song. I mean, it's just
No, no.
unless you're a symphony orchestra, it's something is going to go awry. So all things considered, I think it had some great moments, but I think there was probably and the tour. I mean, from the videos and recordings I heard, I mean, the way that they utilized Bruford and Alan White was just genius. I mean, having Bruford do a lot of that sort of unique percussion stuff, and White just his great straight ahead powerhouse drumming style. And yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with your opinion on that one. It just didn't quite make my list.
All right. Well, what did make number 7 for you?
It is. Oftentimes, this is the number one on a lot of people's lists. So I think 7 from here on up are all albums I will put in the category of albums that I absolutely love and really find few flaws in. And this is where it started to get a little bit tougher for me. Number 7 is Close to the Edge. And I think that this is, again, sort of the height of the classic Yes lineups progressive rock prowess. The song Close to the Edge takes up a whole side. It's just I mean, if you've ever had the chance to see it performed live, it's some great stuff. The cover with its kind of minimalist green thing with just the Yes logo on it is pretty iconic as well. And I believe this was the last one with Bruford, right?
I'm not sure on that one. That was
Yeah,
the.
I'm almost positive this is the last one with Bruford. And
Yeah,
you know, so
it was.
so it's kind of, you know, I mean, it kind of is the end of an era for them. I mean, I know Yes went through a lot of lineup changes, but you know, the two areas where they were fairly constant are drummer and bass. Obviously, I mean, bass they've only had two people, and same with drummer. I mean, every other instrument they've had at least three.
Well, you only really had Howe and Rabin, so I mean that right there.
Peter Banks, he was on the first two
Well,
albums,
yeah,
so that's
well,
so that's three. So you got three guitarists. You've had, I don't even know how many keyboardists, maybe 110. I think you and I are the only ones that have never played keyboards on a Yes album.
but if you think about it, for the longevity of the band, they have actually, with the exception of the keyboard player, they pretty much kept every other position pretty much rock solid. I mean, that's for the amount of time that they've been around. That is actually amazing because you have any other bands around that same time have gone through like probably double the amount of people.
Well, I'm trying to think, you know, off top of my head. I mean, in terms of recorded on albums, I think Chris Squire sang a song at one point, but I don't know if Steve Howe ever sang a song. But as far as true lead vocalists, they've had four, right? Because you had Anderson, um, Benoit David, John Davidson, and Trevor Horn.
Right.
And then bass player, you know, Billy Sherwood, Chris Squire. It was only Chris Squire for a long time. The three guitarists, you know, Banks, Howe, and Sherwood actually played some guitar as well, but we could throw him into the bass category. But yeah, the keyboardists, you had Tony Kaye, who went twice, Rick Wakeman, Jeff Downs, Patrick Moraz, Igor Khrushchev, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. So that's five, right?
Well,
And maybe
Oliver Wakeman, yeah.
Oliver Wakeman was six. So yeah, I mean they've interchanged, but it's like from album to album. You're right. I mean, it's weird because I think like from album to album they would only change like one guy. You know what I mean? Because if you think about it,
Hmm.
Close to the Edge, and then I believe Relayers next, right? No, I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe it's Tails, but either way, most of the time it was only one or two players that was changing from album to album. So they've at least had some consistency. But we could talk about this till the end of time and certainly bore everybody to death. So we should probably get back to the list.
All right.
We're,
So
you
that
know, this like this top 10 is turning into a progressive rock video because it's going to be like an album length. I mean, it's incredible. But that's what's so great about Yes as a band, you know.
right. All right. So my number 7 is Tormato.
Ooh, look at that. Thank
Yeah.
you,
See,
Joey.
and there you were all worried about people not liking that album. I never understood that. But anyhow, that's my number 7. It went platinum, so I don't understand why the fuss. It actually made number 10. So I mean, if it was a really bad album, I don't think it would have ever gone that high and done that well. Especially considering the album before it, actually the last three albums before it only went gold. So for whatever reason, they actually sold more copies of Tormato than the last three albums almost probably combined. It's
I
kind
don't
of
know. You
weird.
know, I got to guess that on some level they must have pressed a lot of copies of it because man, I still see the records everywhere. Like I've never gone to a used record store that doesn't have at least two copies of Tormato. I think other than Frampton Comes Alive, you know, I mean, I can't think of another album that I've just seen more copies that are still, well, Styx Cornerstone. I see a lot of those too, which drives me nuts because I love that album. Like, I don't understand why that doesn't get the love that it deserves, but you know, whatever.
Yeah, so getting back to this album, a couple of these songs actually appeared on a couple of the live albums. "Don't Kill the Whale" was a big song for him. "Madrigal," that's a unique song. It's short, but it stands out. Um, "Onward," which is a Squire song. Yeah, there's a lot of good songs that just never got the airplay. I mean, this album, I don't think I've ever heard a song on a radio, to tell you the truth, unless they were doing like album sides or something like that, where they were just playing overnight. 97 Rock used to play a lot of these albums in their entirety overnight. That's like the only time you would ever hear something like that on the
Yeah.
radio, you know. But for the most part, definitely, in my opinion, one of the better Yes albums.
Yep. I got to agree with you there for sure.
All right, we're getting down to the wire here now. What do you
So
got for
where are we?
number
No,
six?
number six.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make a suggestion. When we get to, when we both give six, we should probably reboot and then do a part two because we got to be pretty good into this show right now, right?
No, we're good. I can always cut it in half.
All right.
Not a problem
Okay.
whatsoever.
Well, ironically enough, speaking of us talking, my number six is indeed a lost Yes classic, and very hard to find on vinyl. By the way, you remember this one?
Talk.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
So yeah, I know. I tell you, I love this album, but you know what? I'm very partial to the Trevor Rabin Yes era. Um, I named a kid after him for goodness sake. But Talk is just, I don't know. I just feel like there's so many beautiful moments on it. It's the first album that Yes actually recorded digitally. Trevor Rabin was the one that produced it, so it's definitely more Trevor Rabin driven than say, even 90125, which was more Trevor Horn driven. Um, but I just love it. I think there's just some absolutely beautiful moments on here. I mean, the calling. Oh, I just love John. I'll tell you what I really love about this particular record is John Anderson's vocal performance. It's just out of this world. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, I mean that album. It probably almost made it near the bottom for me on the top 10, but it just fell a little short. Um, I really don't have too much to add about it. It's not a bad album. It just didn't make my top 10 because I felt there was 10 stronger albums, basically.
Yeah, and it came at a time where it's a bit of an outlier. It sort of popped up out of nowhere. I mean, Yes wasn't super active at the time, and it was the post union thing, so they had to follow up with that whole big union tour, and certainly music had changed by that point. I mean, this came out probably mid, grunge, which all classic rock era artists say grunge ruined classic rock. So I think this record came at a time where it was really hard for people to grasp onto. And I mean, it originally didn't come out on vinyl. That's actually a fairly new pressing. You could only get it on CD, and I think for a long time it was kind of hard to find.
Yeah, yeah, that was the follow-up to Union. Like you said, in '94, that's when,
Yeah.
the landscape really started to change more towards grunge, just like you said.
Yeah.
So that's when, classic rock was like almost like a swear word or, you know, that's
Yeah.
just the way it was. I mean, people could care less about those bands at that point. They weren't selling albums, they weren't selling tickets, and unfortunate because some bands actually put out some decent albums in that time, but they just never get their proper recognition for it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree 100%. I mean, it said there's so many, it's almost, I almost wish we could, maybe mentally piece together the lost rock albums of the 90s because there's so
Yeah,
many bands that put out a record in that era that just got overshadowed because of the state of the music industry. And I think a lot of bands became discouraged too. They just said the heck with it and kind of ended their recording career around that time because they just didn't see the value in recorded music because then the download era came too. This is when Napster, when everybody was like, if they really wanted a record, they just download it. And you might think, oh, classic rock era people wouldn't have just downloaded their record, but if you had a kid and the new Yes album came out, you could just be like, oh, can you get that new Yes album for me? Click. They just download it and burn a copy for you. So it was
yeah,
just kind of the perfect storm against classic rock in that era.
yep. All right. Well, I'm gonna slip my number six in here real quick, and that was none other than "Going for the One," which came out back in 1977. It was recorded in late '76, early '77, and it came out in the summer of '77. Unique cover. I always liked that cover. It was interesting with the building and everything. Obviously, they have a couple classics on here that they were actually playing in concert the last time I seen the ARW version. Wondrous Stories, Awaken, two great songs. Turn of the Century, another kind of one that gets lost in the shuffle. Um, I like this album. I really think it's made number 6, so they definitely have they have only 5 albums better than this in my opinion.
Hence why you picked this number 6.
Exactly.
Oh goodness. All right, so where are we? Number 5.
Well, this is it, the top 5 now.
The top 5. So my 5, drama. Yes,
Oh
and
wow.
I will again mention my conflicted feelings about this particular record,
Hmm.
and that I'm a huge John Anderson fan. I think this is actually the only non John Anderson lead vocal record that made my list. The Fly From Here revisited. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the original album was recorded with Benoit David, and
Hmm.
then Trevor Horn went back and laid lead vocals down for that, and overdubbed Benoit David's, and that album has some great moments on it too that are very reminiscent of this sort of drama era record. So I really learned to appreciate Trevor Horn's voice because obviously it's very different from Anderson's. I mean, it shares some similarities, but he definitely doesn't have the range or kind of the otherworldly heavenly sound that John Anderson has, and the lyrics. This was a real shift in lyrics. I think Anderson is. I mean, we haven't talked about it yet, but as a lyricist, John Anderson is just. I mean, I don't know. This dude could have written the Bible if he just sat down and wanted to. I mean, he's just a wonderful lyricist, and and so this one was a little different in the sense that it was straightforward. But I think the importance of drama can't be underscored. Is that really this is the record that laid the groundwork for the resurgence of progressive rock in the 1980s, and I say that because it's Asia, I think, was the band that actually was able to capitalize on MTV, and obviously we know the Buggles connection to MTV as well. But this was the first album where I think they successfully kind of tapped into the 80s sound and took some of those progressive rock concepts and pared them down a little bit, made them a little bit more palatable, a little bit more punch. And again, Asia perfected that, and then you had groups like GTR that came later, and ELP was able to take advantage of that. I mean, Genesis certainly started to do some shorter songs as well, and they had a great resurgence in the 80s. So I think that this is it could be considered a groundbreaking album. And in terms of tracks, I mean, Tempest Fugit, the bass line on that is probably, it's got to be one of the greatest bass lines ever. It's just a lot of fun. I used to love it when they, in fact, even during the 90125 tour, they just have a quick Tempest Fugit breakdown, and they did the whole thing with yes, yes. So I thought that was pretty cool too. So, and I really learned to appreciate this album only because they performed it in its entirety a few years back. But before that, I kind of looked at it with a John Anderson's not on it. It's not real, yeah. So now I appreciate it for what it is. I feel like I could still love this record and still love John Anderson. How's that?
Perfect. All right, so that's your number 5. So we're cracking the top 5 here. So nothing like cracking the top 5 with one of my favorite albums. It's got the reason why I like this one probably is because of there's a couple songs. Well, this is another album actually. It only has 3 songs on it, believe it or not. But the one song that I really, really just love is "And You and I." So obviously we're coming from Close to the Edge here, which oddly enough is their highest charting album of all time. Number 3 it reached and went platinum. Came out in the year 1972.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, it's weird when you look back and see how old some of these albums are. And like you had mentioned earlier, the last album to feature Bill Bruford on drums. But and this was the follow-up to their successful 1971 classic "Fragile." Yeah, so considering it only had 3 songs on, that was kind of risky at the time because up to that point, all their albums had a pretty decent amount of songs on them. And then this is the first album, the feature that really only had like a limited of 3 songs on it. And then of course they followed that up, with a couple more albums to do similar in that style, mostly in the mid '70s. But and You and I, and of course the title cut, just give those ones a listen, and you can understand why this album is definitely, really, really highly regarded here. Um, you had mentioned about this album already, so I guess you don't have nothing else to add, right?
Well, in the interest of time, no. I mean, but I agree with everything you said. And You and I is a great song, and Starship Troopers on this one as well.
No.
I No, it's not. Which one's Starship Trooper on? That's on the Yes album.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Uh, Even though this doesn't have Starship Trooper on it, going from memory here, folks. I need to take better show notes. But so that brings us to number 4. See how I just kind of weaved out of that faux pas
That predicament,
with
yeah.
that Starship Trooper predicament. My number 4 is, you've actually mentioned this one before, and that is Relayer. So the
Oh,
reason
wow.
I love Gates of Delirium. I really do. It's just a great song. I mean, I don't know. It's one of them classic one side, ridiculously long, kind of like Close to the Edge, but I think it's a little bit more melodic than Close to the Edge. I mean, Close to the Edge can get very busy at times in a lot of that song. I think Gates has just there's just so much going on in it. I mean, it's more like a classic symphony than anything. So that's why it gets very high marks from me. I mean, side 2 is Sound Chaser and To Be Over, which are both really good songs. But honestly, I think the strength of Gates of Delirium alone probably makes this album, really, really special to me.
All right. So you're number
That was my 4. And
4.
Relayer does not have Starship Trooper on it, does it?
They couldn't fit it on. It was too long.
It was too long. Yeah, everybody's yelling at the screen. Starship Trooper isn't on Close to the Edge. Who is this guy?
Yeah.
And
Cut
he
him
likes
off.
Trombado. you know?
All right, well, let me give you my number 4, and then we can probably, hopefully, eventually, we're going to land on the one that Starship Trooper will be on. So, but my number 4 is actually one you just mentioned a little whiles back there, Big Generator, the follow-up to the
Nice.
hugely successful 90125. Yeah, this is the first tour I ever saw the band on, so to me, this album has a little bit of a special feel. Um, I think. There's a couple tracks I'm not really high on, including the title track. Um, well, maybe yeah. A couple other ones are a little weak, but the ones that do it for me, obviously, like you mentioned, the hugely successful "Love Will Find a Way," which cracked the top 40 as a single. Um, that's definitely. I just love the way the interchange in vocals with Trevor and John Anderson alternating back and forth during the song there with a lot of that. Now Rabin, he's definitely, we mentioned the vocalist, but you got to remember he sang a lot of these songs too, as we will probably talk about as we get closer to the end here.
Yeah.
He's a really good singer, something that kind of he never gets credit for, really. He gets credit for the guitar and the writing and everything else, but you don't really hear too much about his vocals. But he's definitely, very strong vocalist in his own right.
I agree. I mean, I love his solo stuff. I have a bunch of his stuff that he did with Rabbit, and I have his solo stuff. And there's a Trevor Rabin album, Trevor Rabin Live in L.A., that is absolutely outstanding. And it's got Love Will Find a Way on it, and some of the Yes stuff, but it's also got the material from Can't Look Away. And I think Can't Look Away is just a an amazing album. That's one that was completely overlooked. I mean, I don't know. I have a couple of copies of that in different forms. So if you haven't listened to that one in a while, I definitely suggest taking a listen again.
All right, yeah, and then just to name a couple other songs on this album that I felt were really good were "Shoot High, Aim Low." That's one I always liked. They actually played that one live on the tour. Um, "Holy Lamb," a little bit acoustic, soft driven, but definitely a good song. And "Finalize," that's one that stands out for me too. Those there's a lot of good music on this album, and it featured the same exact lineup, obviously, as the 90125 album. Big Generator, first tour I ever seen with the band, and definitely made me a fan for life after I saw that tour.
Yeah, for sure. And Larry Mullen Jr. loves that record as well. Larry Mullen from U2. All right.
So I'm guessing our top three are going to be the same albums. I don't know if they're going to be in the same order, but let's see what you got for your number three.
Yeah, I know. Like it's weird because man, I mean, I hope so. I mean, obviously, you have "Fly From Here" as number one, right? Okay, number three. This is a record that I'm pretty sure has the song "Starship Trooper" on it. It is the Yes album, and
Hey, ring some bells and
yay!
whistles.
Finally, yay! It gets the trivia question right. Final trivia or Final Jeopardy. So yeah, this is the first record with Steve Howe.
Hmm.
I mean, this is stuff that's obviously still in the group's lineup or still being performed live today. I mean, Starship Trooper has just been it's been a concert closer many times over the years. Seen All Good People. I mean, you're not going to go to a Yes show without hearing that. And Shaw Blades, man, remember that version that they did of Your Move? That
Your
was just
move,
so
yep.
wonderful as part of that song. And the clap, I mean, really just an incredible instrumental, kind of before like Triumph used to do some of the same things with those guitar instrumentals and clap and Mood for a Day. I mean, this has got the clap on it. Perpetual Change. I mean, it's a great record. I mean, it's stood the test of time. This material is still performed live by the band as it should be because as John Anderson is a solo artist, plays it as well.
And don't forget, even though you couldn't find out what album Starship Trooper was on, yours is no disgrace, Tom Jennings.
Yeah, that's a great song. I love the
Oh,
live version of that on
oh
Yes
yeah.
Songs, man. It's just it's such a great song. But I'll clap for you for saying that.
The
I good there?
clap.
The clap, yeah. Better to clap than have the clap, as they say.
And this is
But
one of those,
anyhow,
yeah, this is one of those rare instances where we can just keep on talking about this album because that's my number three as well. This is
yay!
working out like a charm.
Working out like a
Yeah, so
charm.
that's why I had to mention yours is no disgrace. So it's worked out good. But yeah, definitely, obviously this is the album that really brought the band to the masses. It was their first commercial success. It reached on the charts here at only reached number 40. But you gotta remember, at the time, this type of music was just really starting to take fold. Had it come out, later on, I'm sure it would have cleaned up even more. But this was a groundbreaking album to say the least, because they were already changed. Their style was changing from their first two albums, with this being the third. As soon as Howe came aboard, and obviously it went platinum. Now, this is one of those albums where I would have to believe that they just never got a chance to recertify it, because you'd almost think they sold more than 1 million by now, because this is such a groundbreaking album that most people who like this type of music have a copy of it, and it's so
Yep.
sad that this RIAA, they never go through and recertify the albums after sometimes, you gotta have a reason to recertify it, but I would almost think this is have to be at least a double platinum album in reality.
It's all about the money there. It's all about the money. So yeah, no, I agree with you. It's a great album. So now number two, interesting. Now let's see. We got two left, and it's going to be between Fragile and 90125. So you and I are either going to continue to be on the same page in the top two, or we're going to deviate. Now I'm going to go number two with 90125.
Ah,
It's a great album. I mean, there's not a bad cut on it. There's not a bad moment on it. Tough decision. But I mean, I don't know. I don't have anything bad to say about it in terms of it being a lesser than number one Yes album. And honestly, between Fragile and 90125, I think we both can agree it's a coin toss. They both have their strengths and for different reasons. But man, I don't know. I don't ever get sick of listening to this record. I think it still sounds great after many years. It's just the story behind it is so fascinating as well. You know, we had the ex Yes Zeppelin project that sort of failed for Squire and White, and then they bring in this Trevor Rabin guy and record a record, and then the record label says it's not good enough, so they bring back John Anderson, and Anderson says he'll only do it if it's a Yes album. And the next thing you know, you had Asia, which kind of set the groundwork, as I said, for this sort of poppier sound.
mm-hmm.
And leaner sound is in terms of the band. But man, these songs are just so good. Owner of a Lonely Heart, Hold On, you know, the whole acapella bit with Leave It, Changes, you know,
It can
just
happen. Hold
it can
on. Yep.
happen. Yeah, it's just it's great. The album art is iconic. I think the tour found the band at a real, you know, just having a lot of energy. They were just really riding an enthusiastic wave. So a lot of great stuff here in terms of 90125. I do have one slight criticism, slight, teeny bit, and that and I actually mentioned this to Chris Squire when I interviewed him before he passed away, and he didn't necessarily disagree or agree with me, but I feel like, you know, I feel like Chris Squire's bass playing is a little bit more rudimentary, and it's a little more buried in the mix than some of the other Yes albums. I think that Yes albums, the non-Raven ones, really, even the Quest. I mean, with Billy Sherwood, kind of playing the Chris Squire role, the bass is much more prominent in the mix. I think they could have done a little bit more with that, like they did on Drama. But Squire just said, "Hey, that's the sound they were looking for. I played it the way they wanted to play it," and he set aside his ego. And I think that in terms of broader commercial appeal, that's great. But that's probably the only reason I would rank it a little bit below Fragile.
All right. Well, I'm just gonna go off this one since we already know that I picked this one number one, and then that it'll keep everything in the flow here.
Yeah,
Yeah, this album is just simply amazing here. It's the album that got me into the band to begin with. Obviously, you know, when it came out, you know, obviously you heard on the radio at any point, usually 97 Rock would crank out anywhere of like four different songs from this album. So when you heard coming up next, yes, you know, you might not always get Owner of a Lonely Heart. You would have gotten possibly It Can Happen. You could have gotten Changes. You could have gotten Leave It. Just so many great stuff. You would hear those songs constantly on the 97 Rock for a good year. They would just keep playing a lot of songs from this album. Um, it's odd that they didn't really touch some of the other stuff. You know, I mean, there's a bunch of other good songs on here that kind of got. Hold On never really got much airplay.
yeah.
Um, Our Song
Oh, love that one. Love,
and
love, love. That was the first one I ever heard from this record, actually.
you know what actually is a really good song on this? It's not actually on the album, but it was recorded. Is Make It Easy.
Yeah.
You familiar with that one?
Yeah, I believe that was the working title of Owner of a Lonely Heart before they added lyrics.
Yeah, I'm not.
And that's why it's always played before Owner of a Lonely Heart.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
I could be wrong. I'm the guy that said Starship Trooper was on Close to the Edge. So let's not take this as, you know, don't yell at the video screen. That so yeah, three things I've said. Tormado's too high, you know.
well,
But
Make It
yeah,
Easy was actually sung by Trevor, obviously. But yeah, it's actually on the 90125, like the remastered version has a lot of bonus tracks on it.
Right.
And yeah, that's just phenomenal to hear all these bonus tracks because you get different versions of you get that acapella Leave It version, which was big. They used to actually play that on the radio once in a while. And
Yeah, that came out as like a 12-inch single too. I remember it had a like a brown cover instead of the gray cover. But
yeah,
now that you mentioned, I think "Make It Easy" was they used to perform it before they played "Owner of a Lonely Heart." But yeah, the original version was a cinema
yep,
track, and
Cinema.
cinema was the working name of the band because there's a song called "Cinema" on 90125, the instrumental piece that leads up to "Leave It." But I think "Make It Easy," that beginning instrumental portion of the song before Trevor sings it. Because there's also a record called what is it, 90124, where Rabin does a bunch of the original demos and stuff of the
Right.
90125 tracks. So
Do you have it?
I think it's on that one. I have it at CD somewhere.
Ah, okay.
So yeah,
Yeah, I'm gonna get my hands on that one. Oh, the
yeah.
dog wants it.
The dogs want a copy of it, right? You guys are finally making your appearance. Right as we get to number one. So we'll wrap it up before they
Yep,
can't handle not getting a walk before much longer.
yep.
Obviously, number one, as I said, I chose Fragile a lot of it because of Chris Squire's bass playing on this, which I think is just groundbreaking.
Mhm.
I think Roundabout is about as perfect a song as has ever been written in the history of recorded music. It lyrically, musically, that guitar intro that every single guitarist on the planet should learn if they haven't already. I mean, it's almost probably akin to like Stairway to Heaven in terms of its iconic status amongst novice guitar players and that use of harmonics and everything. It's just I don't know, man. I never get sick of listening to this album. I think it has a lot of great prog elements as too. It's got some of that progressive rock excess to it, but yet it's still also very very listenable. So and this is I think this is the album that really made Yes Yes. I mean, the Yes album laid the groundwork for a long career, but Fragile just cemented it. I mean, to follow up the Yes album with an even stronger record
Mhm.
is simply incredible. Because as we talked about with Big Generator, I mean, Big Generator was an inferior follow up to 90125. Um, Fragile being a superior follow up to the Yes album to me is just mind blowing when you think about it. And then and then they followed up with Close to the Edge. So I mean, that period of time, I mean, they were just doing just some incredible work. But yeah, this one sits at the top of the pinnacle of the mountain for me.
All right, yeah, and this one obviously my number two, as we mentioned, we're just lumping them all together so we could talk about it all at once. Another album that how it only sold platinum, it's got to probably be even
Yeah.
higher. Obviously we kind of skipped by 90125 when I failed to mention that that was their biggest selling album at three times platinum, and their only album to have two top 40 hits as well. So because they didn't have a lot of top 40 hits, and so they had two of them on 90125. So, but it's getting back to Fragile. Reached number four, which is their second highest charting album, right behind Close to the Edge, which reached number three. Like you said, this one was the follow up to the S album, and a lot of that groundwork laid on the S album led to this album. And I mean, you don't see a review about this one, a negative review about this album anywhere. You just don't. How
Yeah.
can you? With stuff like South Side of the Sky. Um, we have Heaven, and what about the great Long Distance Runaround? One of my all-time
Yeah.
favorite Yes songs. Just love it. And then Heart of the Sunrise too. Another lengthy song, but yet they played that one a lot in concert. Went over really well. And then of course, what about the Fish? We almost forgot to
Yeah.
mention the Fish.
Well, and I think too that's the other piece is that really this is probably in terms of the all of the Yes lineups, this is the most talented at every instrument, hands down. Alan White, outstanding drummer. Bill Bruford's a better drummer, stylistically in a lot of ways. I mean, he is. I mean, that's not saying that Alan White isn't an incredible drummer. He is. I love his drumming.
Hmm.
Steve Howe, I mean, he's their best guitarist they ever had. Trevor Rabin, I mean, this guy wrote soundtracks. He's an incredible guitarist, but Howe's a better guitarist. I mean, Chris Squire, obviously their best bass player. Rick Wakeman, hands down the best keyboardist. I don't even know if there's a close second. And John Anderson, same thing, best vocalist that they had. And you know what? They all have their great moments on this record. It's not like, you have like anyone's necessarily a standout performer. I mean, the Fish, gives Squire that chance to really kind of shine. Heart of the Sunrise. I mean, that's a song that both Steve Howe and John Anderson, just incredible. I mean, that guitar work and then the vocals. I mean, it's just.
Oh, and don't forget the drumming. The drumming on that song, unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, all the way around, it's just such a great experience. It's such a great listen. I mean, as far as an entry point to Yes, it's a very logical entry point to Yes as well. And, I can say as many great things about 90125, but again, I think that in terms of the band's history and their importance as a music act, there's no 90125 without Fragile, because Fragile is what established Yes's reputation and as a band, and no one's gonna. And that's one of the reasons that 90125 had to be recorded under the name Yes, because they had already gotten, they had already earned the respect of the music buying crowd. If that album had been released under the name Cinema, and it was just as good, I don't think it would have done nearly as well. I think it would have done well commercially. But I don't think it would have been nearly the success that it was being a Yes album, 90125. And again, that goes back to Fragile.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on this episode. Definitely a lot of good stuff here we talked about. These albums, great memories, great memories. A lot of the shows that we've seen. Did you see both of the ARW shows, the one at the Buff State and the one at the casino?
Only saw the one at Buff State. Yeah, I didn't get to see the one at the casino. I don't remember what was going on, or maybe I'm just not a huge fan of the venue, but I'm not going to say that. Yeah, probably because I'm not a huge fan of the venue.
Oh, come on.
Hey, I don't know, man. I mean, I feel like a band like, with all due respect, to Seneca Niagara Casino, who's, over the years, I've seen some incredible shows there. I think that ballroom is suitable for a lot of different artists, but I think a band like Yes really needs to be seen in either a small theater or a theater setting like that UB theater, or like an old movie theater or whatever. To a certain extent, I think they still are good in an arena, but it just definitely doesn't work in like a casino ballroom. It just doesn't have the same impact. Even an outdoor amphitheater, I think, is an excellent place for a band like Yes, because you can kind of sit back and really soak it in. I think casinos, again, you get a lot of people that go to those shows that aren't necessarily there for the show either. So you don't have a band like Yes. You should be going to sit and absorb the entire show, not to hang out and chat with your friends or gamble. So
Wow.
I just, I mean, I'm calling it like it is. I mean, that's what it is. I think that, again, I've seen a lot of great I mean, I saw Steely Dan at Seneca Niagara, and I think that was, I had people coming and going throughout the whole show, and I'm thinking, how do you just walk in and out of a Steely Dan show, for God's sake? I mean,
What?
you should have super glue to your butt so you don't get out of your seat during this whole thing. So that's the kind of stuff that drove me a little crazy about that particular venue.
And
now I'll never get to see a show there again, but they're not going to watch, so who cares, right?
let's wrap it up with probably. I remember you talking about this one, the Bears Den.
Yes.
John Anderson.
Oh God.
All by himself.
Whew. Man. Isn't it interesting that a venue like a Seneca Niagara, which people outside of the area, because I think most Yes fans aren't going to be aware of. So, quick background: Seneca Niagara Casino is near Niagara Falls, New York, and I think a lot of casinos have multiple venues. So there's always one venue for the larger shows. And Seneca has a larger venue, which is like a big conference room. They also have an outdoor space that they put concerts, but they have a thing called the Bears Den, which, if you can go online and look it up, it is the polar opposite of a poor room. It's probably one of the best rooms you'll ever sit in your life. It's 440 seats. John Anderson performed a solo show there. And I saw him with Rick Wakeman at Kleinhans as
Fine
well.
hands, yeah.
John Anderson is an engaging performer, not just because he's such a great singer. He's funny. He's very engaging. I mean, he's just I think sometimes he gets this reputation as being a little out there because of his mystical lyricism and whatnot. But he's just so funny and introspective, and he can be self-deprecating. And we got to see all of that in the solo show. So you really got to appreciate just how incredible his voice is because it was in a small setting. But it felt like we were hanging out with John Anderson as a human being. And if you ever get a chance to experience a John Anderson solo show and you're even the slightest bit of Yes fan, oh my God, you gotta go. It's just, and Wakeman and Anderson together, just the two of them, it's like a comedy show. Those guys they just banter, and Wakeman's humor is so offbeat and hilarious that's a great experience as well.
All right, well, that puts a wrap on this episode. Top 10, yes. So we're gonna have to come up with something to top this show somehow. We'll have to come up with some other things we can do here. But we'll talk about things and get them all worked out. But stay tuned soon for another new episode of another artist where we'll do some rankings.
Got to do some rankings, right? All right, but thank you very much, and of course, out there, we appreciate you. This was a long episode, so if you made it to the end, I know I speak for Joey when I say we really enjoy making these, and it's not to present us as being any smarter than anybody out there. You guys all are just as smart as us and love music just as much of us as us. And obviously, if you're watching this, you're a Yes fan. It's just for an opportunity to kind of talk about records and revisit them, maybe learn a little bit of something new. And I think Joey and I, through this experience, have been able to go back and kind of rediscover some great records. So we hope that you're doing the same thing through these shows as well.
Exactly, and that's what it's all about. I think when you look at other people's perspective, it turns you on to something you might have missed, something you
Yeah.
weren't aware of, and it just helps the overall experience.
Yep. No, I agree. And I said, I mean, people will disagree with us, and that's okay. Cause that's what this is about. This isn't a test of our music knowledge versus yours. It's just an opportunity for all of us to kind of engage and just enjoy music together.
Yeah, and exactly. And don't be afraid to leave your lists on the comments section here on the YouTube page. Let us know what you felt and what you feel about certain albums, and that's what we want. We want to get some reactions.
Yeah, no nasty comments about my Tormato ranking though.
Okay.
Unless they're in jest. I can handle it.
All right, well, that bids us adieu on this episode. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll see you next time.